Thank you so much for joining us on this ASP chat. We really appreciate it. This whole month, we are diving into the first 100 days of the Biden administration as we transfer power, talking to elected and ex-elected officials like yourself about what goes on during this transition. Being that you had a transition like this as governor, give us an idea of what Joe Biden, his family, and his colleagues can expect as they transition to their new roles in the White House.
Well, some of it is heady stuff, and some of it is incredibly, mundane. I mean, people may know while the president-elect is up at the Capitol for the festivities, that couple of hours, a van pulls up and moves all the stuff for the outgoing president and his family out, and all the stuff for the incoming president and his family in. And they set it all up right down to hanging pictures on the wall so that by the time they get back from the ceremony, they go into their home. And there are questions like whose toothbrush goes in which cup in which bathroom. And they try to sort as much of that out as possible in advance. So the first things that happen are the family, finds its way around the private quarters, the apartment above the state level, which is on the so this would be the second and third floors. For President Biden, he knows his way around the West Wing, where the office is. But he's been busy, as you've seen in the early reports, issuing executive orders, changing some policies from the outgoing administration that he can do with the stroke of a pen, as it were. And his staff is off trying to figure out, how to make their security badges work and where their phones are and where their offices are. Meanwhile, the government has to keep functioning right down to and including security briefings. So it's a pretty chaotic little bit.
Sure. Well, as you said, President Biden is expected to announce many policy reversals and executive actions in the coming weeks. Which agency or policy area do you expect to see the greatest shift between the Trump and Biden administration?
Oh man, that's a long list. I think we'll see big changes and have actually in the first less than a day in foreign policy in terms of rejoining international agreements like the Paris Climate Accords or international agencies like the World Health Organization. I think the whole idea of opening our doors out to the world instead of turning our backs and closing our doors to the world will be a big shift. I think domestically, we have, in my opinion, suffered from not having national coordination of a response to the pandemic, both in terms of how we keep ourselves safe and how we get vaccinations around. And I think the president has shown that he needs to take charge of that and try to get a common set of guidelines across the country and move 100 million vaccines out to people in the first 100 days. And then I think the Justice Department, my own haunting ground, will see a lot of change as well.
So speaking of the Justice Department, you worked in the Justice Department under President Clinton in specifically the Civil Rights Division.
Right.
What was your focus under that department at the time?
Well, the Civil Rights Division is one of, I think, 6 divisions in the Justice Department who have responsibility for enforcement of specific federal laws. And in the case of the Civil Rights Division, it's the laws that address racial, gender, disability, religious discrimination in housing, in education, in employment. There are voting rights issues. There are issues around excessive use of police force, as you can imagine, which is a hot topic today. And we were fortunate that we had an administration that was actually interested in the topic. The president himself was interested in the topic, so he was very engaged personally. He had no problem. He was also a night owl, President Clinton, so he had no problem picking up the phone at 1 or 2 in the morning and calling the head of the Civil Rights Division and just, bouncing off ideas. That takes a little getting used to.
Yeah, I'm sure. In your opinion, what are the top criminal justice reforms that the Biden administration should pursue in the first 100 days?
Well, it's hard to talk about these in the first 100 days because some of them are profoundly important and they will take longer than that. Sentencing reform. we have had a pattern in the United States for a long time, 30 years of warehousing lawbreakers, and we have at the same time that we've been imprisoning so many people, in many cases for relatively minor offenses. We have taken away from the prisons the programs that prepare people to come out, and 95+% of the people in come out one day. And in the last 30 years, in many cases, they've been coming out, or in some, more dangerous than they were when they went in. So I think the idea of preparing people for their ultimate release so that they can rejoin productive society is an idea that is important. I know it's something that the Biden team cares about, but it will take time because there's some legislative changes that have to happen there.
Well, there's an ongoing federal investigation into thousands of people related to the riots on Capitol Hill about a week ago.
Right.
Will this new Justice Department charge President Trump, do you think, for crimes related to the breach in the Capitol, and should they?
I don't know the answer to whether they will. And I think the answer to whether they should, it's clear on the law and more complicated on the general policy. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Given all I've read, the FBI, which is in charge of the investigation, has been very aggressive. The investigation is active. There are lots of folks under investigation, and there are a number of charges that have been brought already. And they've been combing through all the social media information and other sources to identify the people who were responsible for and who participated in the insurrection. I think there seems to be consensus, and I share it, that the president himself incited the violence, the attack on the Capitol. That ought not be a partisan view, but I think it is sometimes heard as a partisan view, candidly. And I think that the reason I say it's a pretty straightforward legal question is because the president's on tape. He's on videotape. It's very clear what he's doing and what his allies at that rally before the attack were doing. In fact, it's quite clear what was that folks were encouraged to come to Washington to bring their weapons and to try their very best to disrupt the orderly transfer of power. The reason I think it is a sensitive political question is that President Biden is very, very interested, as he should be, in unifying the country. And I'm sure there is a part of the calculation about whether to charge President Trump himself that will be, does this bring us peace, or does this prolong the division in some way? Now, having said that, and I realize this answer is too long, there are additional ways that President Trump can be held accountable, and I think he should be. He has been impeached. Those articles of impeachment will be tried in the Senate, and he can also be censured and barred from running for office again. So there are other ways to hold President Trump accountable, in addition to the criminal charge.
Being censured, is that what prevents you from running again, or is that a separate thing? Is censuring one thing?
So I think I'm right in this, that being censured is not the same thing as being barred.
From running again. Gotcha.
You can add a condition to the censure.
Sure.
That you be barred.
One thing, Chris and I think we spent 2.5 years going back and forth to Washington interviewing elected officials. And I'd say, and we've been asked this ourselves, the biggest surprise has been how many people talk about, they don't report on the planes of the land, and how there are a lot of folks who want to talk about the things that they're trying to get done together. But the reward mechanism, or maybe the vitriol at the top, that people felt like they had to participate in that narrative, didn't allow for it. And maybe the hope going forward is there's an opportunity now for people to talk about real issues and acknowledge difference without having to vilify each other in the way you just said.
I think, it's certainly something I'm hoping and praying for the sake of us all. I've never believed that we had to agree on everything before we worked together on anything. I was astonished by the reaction to Barack Obama's election by Leader McConnell announcing in the midst of a global economic crisis that the number one agenda of the Republican Party was to make Barack Obama a one-term president. And I can tell you stories about the lengths to which they went again, disserving the American people to bring that about. So I think this is not just Trump, but I think that President Trump took that tactic to an entirely different level and punished people who or tried to politically who were not aligned.
Sure. Back in October, then candidate Joe Biden said he would form a bipartisan commission to study possible reforms to the Supreme Court, including the court's expansion. First, can you explain what expanding the court means? And second, what would be the pros and cons?
So expanding the court refers to increasing the number of justices on the court from its current number of 9. In the past, historically, we've had fewer. We've had more, I think as many as 10. The number of justices on the Supreme Court has been 9 for decades now, certainly all the time I've been in practice. And the reason it comes up is because we have had a balance, I would say it's an uneasy balance, between so-called conservative appointees to the court and more progressive or liberal appointees to the court until very recently. And Barack Obama had the opportunity to continue that balance, but to shade it a little bit more toward the progressive side. And the Republicans saw that, and they denied him that seat. They would not even give his nominee a hearing, which was unconscionable. In President Trump's case, they rammed through 2 appointees and have substantially shifted the balance in the court to a so-called conservative point of view. And the reason I hedge on the term conservative is because, in fact, many of these justices are judicial activists. They are very much about driving an agenda. So a lot of folks on the ground are talking about expanding the size of the court. The pros are that we may get, in the short term, a better balance of view and approach. The downside is, Democrats won't have control forever. It's just never like that, right? It goes back and forth. And so does that just invite the other side, when they have control, to shift everything back the other way, and then to be even more aggressive about whom they support as nominees, and with even more strident views. So it's not an easy question. There's some other reforms that have been brought up, and I'm sorry I'm going on, but interesting ones like instead of a life appointment, a term, or maybe your appointment ends when you turn 70, so that there's a regular turnover of talent, and we give younger jurists an opportunity as well. And that's what I'm intrigued by.
We really appreciate your time. This is so important to get your perspective during this transition. Thank you so much, Governor. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Governor.
Take care.